We're going to be talking about design today. Hi, Darshan.
Hi, can you hear me well and see me well?
Yes, absolutely clear. Can hear you
Okay,
perfectly, see you perfectly.
okay.
Yes. So, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to today's session.
Thank you
I
for having me. Yeah,
Yes, I will just start with a quick introduction,
sure.
and then we can go ahead. So, everyone meet Darshan. Darshan is the global head of design at Godrej. She's also been a catalyst there in bringing design thinking into Godrej. She's reinvented brands like Synthol, Goodnight, and Be Blunt, all of which are brands you must have heard of. She's also been on the Cannes Lions jury for product design in 2018. And she is an alumni of both the Harvard Business School and the National Institute of Design. And the latter is also where I'm from. So it's lovely to connect with you. Um, so, in order to do this session on design, we Darshan actually suggested that we apply design thinking to the session itself,
Yes.
in order to understand, what it is that you actually think about design, so that we can figure out what would be most useful to you. So, we did a survey last week, and some of you participated in that, and we got about 33, 35 answers on what design means to you. So, I'm going to tell you briefly of about what we learned from your answers, and then we'll go ahead. So our question was, what is good design? So most of the answers were focused on the aesthetics of it. That a good design is something that looks good, or a good design is something that leaves an imprint on your eye and your mind. Um, so that there was a clear bias towards that good design is about aesthetics. The second question was, which design field excites you the most? And an overwhelming majority, which is one third of you literally, said graphic design, followed by fashion. So those are two, obviously, those are two areas of design, but we're also going to talk about more. And then another question on what you'd expect from a designer. The most common answer was developing a brand voice. So there's an expectation that the designer should help you clarify and develop and also resonate with your brand and your brand voice. So just taking off from that, Darshan's going to tell us all about design in a bit, but I also want to do some myth busting here because there are very, very common myths about design and all of them are based in somewhat, like they're somewhat true, but they are not entirely true. So Darshan, should I spit out some of these myths and will you help clarify them?
Absolutely. Thank you guys for hearing me out here. Design, of course, is a very vast subject. It's very difficult to encapsulate the spirit of it in such a short time. But in keeping in context with where we are in India compared to where the global countries are in the field of design, I think it's important for us to now try and understand this discipline a little bit better. And when it comes to myth, I have always heard, when I joined Godrej earlier, people would think of me as if, I'm going to beautify everything, or, design is only applicable to only premium experiences, or it has to be expensive if it's designer product or a designer object or an apparel. It has to be shiny and it has to have certain bling, and fashion and jewelry, because of the history in India, has been very strongly associated in India.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong about that, but I think it's time now, especially with so many startups coming up, and to understand the real value of the design tool. That it's a tool to help you so much more than just stylization, adornment, and decoration, right? So we have to differentiate both the things. That design fundamentally slightly different than stylization or adornments or just doing a graffiti or making a pretty face, because there's a lot more that goes before that arrives. Of course, eventually it has to look very aesthetic. It has to be appealing. Beauty is very essential, and it's very, again, beauty is again very contextual, but it will come, but not before some of the foundational design principles, and you cannot forget to apply them. So I think it's time that we kind of now move forward to look at what exactly can we use design for and how can we apply better. And I think, thank you for this poll. I think it really helped us kind
Yeah.
of, again, it was kind of, in a way, whatever assumptions I had, kind of rectified by that, and I understood where we are today. And I think we are better off now. Some of the answers were encouraging because saying that it can help us sharpen the meaning of the brand, etc., are more evolved versions of answers. And I'm very happy that some of us are looking forward to use design at that level.
Yes. So, Darshan, if design is not only about how something looks or how it appears, what is it really?
Um, well, I would say, design is a tool where you can put together various factors in a certain order. So it's definitely some of them actually mentioned that, but actually there are putting it order, putting some perspective, more importantly, putting context before anything else, and bringing in relevance. So I think it's hard to define, but what I would say that you have to trust in this discipline. The training makes sure that designers are sensitized towards what information is important. So I think to be able to design the purpose before product or an
Yeah.
experience is where design literally starts. I would say design is a purpose-based discipline. Um, and I think with that, the clarity starts, and it's coded in a lot of morals. It's coded in a lot of goodness, whether it is social goodness, whether it is just happiness to create delight, joy. It has a lot of interesting aspects as an end result, but eventually it's all about putting together an order to a lot of information and a lot of data one would be having, but not knowing what to do with that. How
Yeah.
can you shape, how can you use some of the blocks to differentiate yourself, to create something more unique and meaningful for every day. um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I also believe, and I want to actually insist on the fact that it is a myth. One more myth is that we believe that design is applicable only to certain industry, more so than few. But I've
Absolutely.
recently been through some of the countries where design is a lot more evolved in terms of its application and its as a function itself. And I've seen that, whether it is financial sectors, whether it is education now, whether it is IT, whether it is communication, there are so many disciplines, that where design can actually be very useful. HR, something like human resources. How can
Yeah.
you design tools? Design is not just about product, but it's about, again, as I said, how do we kind of design frameworks around
Yeah.
achieving our purposes. So that's where we are. I mean, and I also think that because it's so vast that, of course, it can be highly intellectual to very aesthetic problems it can solve. Um, but it is absolutely, up to what sector, what industry you're working on, and that can be defined later on.
So you're saying that designers are not only just creative people, and design is not only for just
Yeah, we
creative
just
people.
don't have tattoos and more piercing, and these are some of the other stereotypes which we have.
Yeah.
But I think looking at the number of design schools we have, and I have seen students work, I have been on juries, and I think our design education is very good. And as India's history into art and craft and traditions, and a lot of the design is actually there in the roots. We just really don't know how
Yeah.
to utilize them. And I think there is definitely a place for a marketplace where I'm sure there are a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs are looking for good design inputs, but there is this lack of understanding of what disciplines,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's another point which I think we lack here in terms of because we are such a huge country, and we are growing so fast, but somehow we fail to fail in terms of making understand people that um, for brand design you need a certain kind of a discipline. For product design you need something else. For strategic design there are disciplines available to you. So I think it's very important where to use classical disciplines like graphic, fashion, textiles, product design. All these are very classical design
Yeah.
disciplines, and more towards execution and of course user centricity, etc. But as we are evolving now, there are more emerging disciplines and we need to know them well. So
Yeah.
that's another myth per se, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So Darshan, what are some basic principles just for someone who's starting off and doesn't know a whole lot about it? And it doesn't matter what they're doing, right? They could be a freelancer, they could be an entrepreneur, they could be thinking of starting a small business, or they could actually be in a job. What
Yeah.
are some basic principles that everyone can use, no matter what they do, that will hold them in good stead design wise?
So I think first and foremost, I would encourage, I think design or investing into designers or creativity or creative people is, I think, not expensive. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would
Yeah.
encourage everybody to, like, my purpose, my goal in life would be, I would like to see every sector using design as a discipline because it just opens up a very different perspective, different opportunities, sometimes crazy, sometimes esoteric,
Yeah.
sometimes probably not realistic, but it's just that spirit of experimentation, is very high. As I have certain pointers, so one is choose the discipline very carefully.
Hmm.
That what exactly. So here is where I would differentiate that creative agency's role versus a design studio as somebody you want to have them on board versus having an in-house designer. They are totally three different things,
Yeah.
right? So I think you make a choice carefully where to use a design studio, where you need to have in-house design. Um, so after the discipline, what is more important at beauty of outcome depends um, on totally on how beautiful the problem or purpose is. So I would spend disproportionate time in just having work with designers or
Hmm.
creatives, handhold them, and make sure that everything that you have is not just sets of expectations, but there's
Yeah.
something that something is tangible enough for you to change, right? And make a brief. I think in design, the first step we do is redefine the brief. So basically, if you are my client, I want to hear you out. What are your
Hmm.
dreams? What are your fears? What are your expectations? It's literally like dating, it's literally
Yeah.
like having to spend that much time um, and making sure that you together visualize the brief first.
Hmm.
That is this what we are talking about? And there are tools that help you do this really well. It's not a rocket science. It's actually based on a lot of common sense, right? So these are simple things and it's like having somebody with you who can think, who can share the same passion with you. So there are a lot of qualitative aspects to this, is what I would focus on. Um, Domain knowledge.
Hmm.
Okay, so if I'm hired in an IT sector, I need to know everything about what they are doing. If I am working on e-commerce platform, I really need to know how it works. So that education, if like for example in GCPL now, like spending time with R&D to understand what exactly insecticide mean, how what is repelling versus killing. I think these definitions really make the base. So having that patience to sit down and to do that homework is very essential, because otherwise what will happen is that if you don't spend this much time, then what will happen is that you will end up being very superficial, and then you'll go back to that same myth and you will end up focusing on beauty, logo, colors, etc. But that
Yes.
all comes much later, right? Like a tree, when you have beautiful flowers and fruits, before that you need to make sure that the roots are
Yes.
absolutely nourished and it
That's a
has
great
all
example.
the strength. um, Other thing I would say is that try and make designs work, whatever you engage into this. If you engage with designers, don't make try and make not to make it in a turn and key process, that I started today, you design this and then you're off. It's
And deliver it.
I think
Yeah.
it doesn't work. It is a continuous process. Okay, a lot of time when you design, that's why we have something called prototyping. We
Yes.
prototype a lot. A prototype which looks beautiful in a studio, when it goes out in the market, it's a totally different thing. And when it gets
Can you?
used, it's the third different thing. Whether it's an IT based product, whether it's a physical product, no matter what. Um, So it's very important that you let the designer or creative people to be there with you till the time you inception of the idea till execution, and not just execution but rollout. Observe and see, what's happening while you're
Hmm.
rolling this out, and make iterations and changes, because that's where the key is. If you don't give attention to it, then there's going to be a bunch of disappointment for sure, because what might happen that you assume certain things even that you did together, but certain things may not pan out as you visualize, so you may have to tweak, stylize, make some variations quickly. And I think that's where I would say that don't make it a cut off kind of a
Yeah.
relationship, and make sure that
Yeah.
it's a continuous relationship with designers, so have a long term. um, um, I would say that one more thing is that, um, if not 60%, at least
Hmm.
50% of the design outcome depends on the champion and the sponsor, right?
Hmm.
I, or say my team at GCPL Design Lab, I think we are blessed to have somebody, a leadership or champion, not, I wouldn't say leadership, but somebody who truly is well educated about
Yeah.
design, you know.
Yeah.
So if you're investing into design, make sure that you've read about how can you better utilize it for yourself. Do a little bit of reading, right? So it's like, if I'm getting into a certain kind of a hobby, I need to know what am I seeking out of it, right? Is it
Yes.
for fitness? Is it for just for my
Yeah.
joy? Is it for, what is it that? So I think similarly, because we are new to this field and we have not explored design to that level of depth, and especially youngsters who are very, now internet is there, now there's so many blogs on design, so many books, podcasts on design. Just see, just read some of it about it, so that the language and the lingo, the communication between you and designer is absolutely productive, where designers, I think, and this is also from my learning, right? Because for what we have done at GCPL, ideally shouldn't have taken so many
Hmm.
years, right? It's
Hmm.
not that difficult. I mean, we eventually make beautiful FMCG products, a lot of hair colors and soaps, and a lot
Yeah.
of meaning, a lot of
Yeah.
brand, and a lot of foundational strategy work. But still, if I can imagine that if I was somewhere where the audience around me or team around me were sensitized about these disciplines a little bit more, I wouldn't have to have kind of take so
To do
much an
that
effort
work.
to
Yes.
educate and create
Yes.
awareness. It kind of was at some point a difficulty, I would say, a challenge.
Hmm. Hmm.
So with youngsters, I would encourage that you let designers, or do certain sessions where the team, because it's a collaborative process, right?
Yes.
And the last and the most important thing I want to leave you guys with to think upon is that role of design is not standalone. I mean, design cannot exist on its own.
In
We
isolation. Yes.
highly, highly, highly depend on cross-functional disciplines, right? I mean, if I
Hmm.
don't know manufacturing, if I don't know sourcing, if I don't know finance and costing, if I don't know research, if I don't know about brand competition, if I don't know about vision of the company, I can just make beautiful products and graphics and decorations, but it wouldn't
Yeah, but they won't work.
land where, yeah, right, it won't work. So I think creating that space for designers in the teams where they can be like a space bubble and attached to every information, I think giving that power and empowering them to do that is the most critical thing. If you don't want to be disappointed in having a designer in your team, that's the main key. And I've seen that happen before. And it also depends on a lot on designers' attitude, I would say. And I think if you open up a space for them, it's also designers' responsibility to make sure that they live up to that. So that's another discussion, that's another issue that we can talk about at some other point. But I think it's important to and it takes time. It takes time.
Hmm.
You're not gonna see anything overnight. If you are looking for a real game changer, which is a long-term benefit, it takes time. So you need to have
Yeah.
patience.
Yeah. Uh, I, Darshan, I think that was very informative, everything you just said. I also want to touch upon the fact that, many of our audiences are, well, let's say they're in jobs or they have small businesses that they run. And even before you can go out to hire a designer, I think there is some education or some work that one needs to do themselves. And there
Yeah.
is a possibility of doing that. So, what would you recommend, let's say, as 3 or 4 things that everyone can do, irrespective of what you are doing, even before reaching out to a designer? How can you educate yourself? Are there some processes that you can start applying, or is there a way that you can start thinking that kind of helps you see how design works and how you can apply it in your work or your business?
I think the best way to do is to, I think, a little bit of sensitization, but also pilot it out yourself first.
Hmm.
You can. So I think there are two parts to it. One is there are a lot of papers available online, right? There are a lot of case studies, and Apple is, I think, it's the most known case study, right?
Yeah.
But there are more like those. There are books, there are blogs that I can actually give you a list of things which you can post probably.
Sure.
A lot of work by IDEO is good to read. There is a
Hmm.
movie called Objectified. There is a movie called Space Odyssey. There are lot of documentaries like Abstract on Netflix. Would be good to see first. Those
Yeah.
are easier thing to digest, and then you can get into more serious books like Change by Design by David Kelly, or there are more recent books. More and it depends. And if you're in IT background, then John Maeda is somebody who you want to follow, and look at his reports on interaction design and experience design and what's changing in that world. So that's another thing which is opening up. So I would just read some of these case studies,
Hmm.
and different models. And I'm very happy if anybody wants to know more specific areas. I can do my research and get back, and probably you can pass on some of those. I'm very happy to help in identifying those. But the second most important thing is try it out.
Yeah.
I haven't. I'm 100% sure that if you have a creative person, even, and there in now these students have internships and diploma projects, right? It's like 2 months to 6 months. It varies. There are many um, schools who have different kind of program, but reach out to placement to this design schools. Definitely visit design schools. That's the
Hmm.
easiest way to go to a design school. Just ask, spend some time with students, see their work. And I think design schools are very open. They will be very happy. They have placement. They have their events when they showcase their work. And I, even now when I go, I get goosebumps because the ideas are just so
Yeah.
brilliant. And I see that we are not able to use anything. It's a pity. So I think these are simple things to do. Just go to schools, spend some time in library. Nobody will stop you from going into, and meet whoever disciplines professors, take their help. Everybody is trying to make this network and connection. And I think it starts from there. Like, in B school now is taking design
Hmm.
courses into their
Yeah.
education. So I think attend some of these courses also is not a bad idea. A lot of design courses are offered by design institutes for some of these startup ventures, and
Yeah.
I think these are great ways. And I think I have seen some of the quality of material that I have seen in institutes, and I think they're very good quality sessions. And I would definitely give it a try before I invest.
Yeah. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Also, for someone who wants to be a designer, I think there is this idea that if you're creative, you can be a designer and that you
Yeah.
don't necessarily need an education. So, I would love for you to talk about the importance of education in design. And B, for someone who wants to make a career in design, what are some things to, how do you know that you'd be a good fit? And B, what are just some things to keep in mind?
Yeah, I remember our team often we joke that, every time we have a workshop, somebody will be pulled out and say, oh, she's a designer or he's a designer. Why don't you start drawing on the board, right?
Drawing. Yes.
I don't think drawing, and I know Trupti from my team, I'm gonna quote her, but she often laughs at this, but and I agree with them that I'm not very good at drawing, right?
Hmm.
But does that mean that I'm not a good designer? I
Yeah.
hope I'm a good designer. So I think it has to do with how creative you are.
Yeah.
I think it's a very different discipline. A design is a science. If you are creative, it is definitely an advantage. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
not denying that drawing is not an advantage. Super advantage. If you can draw well, if you can be creative with mixed media and softwares, beautiful. But we call it design thinking, and I think it's the most misused word. But I
It's
think there
thrown
is
around so
definitely,
much now. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a huge aspect of designer which is psychology, right?
Hmm.
A
Hmm.
lot depends on understanding human, understanding scale, proportion, understanding connection, systems, categorization. There is a lot of math, there is a lot of science, there is a lot of engineering to it. So it's actually a fusion field in a way. And creativity only brings those aspects out better.
Yeah.
And creative mediums, I would say, not creativity. If you're creative, you can probably express that better than anybody
Yeah.
else. So education definitely gives you a framework, and I think that's very important. Otherwise, you may sound very abstract, and you may not be able to compact a lot of these ideas into something that can be prototyped or can be manifested.
Hmm.
So I think no, don't see. You can also learn on the job. Okay, I'm
Hmm.
not discounting that, but I would still recommend you to have at least basic foundational courses, if not full education.
Yes. And also, what are okay, how can you know that if how can you know that you would make a good designer?
um, Very tough. Unless and until it totally depends on who's giving you a chance to fail and how much more can you
I
fail
love that.
until you no, you have to do it by trial. You have to keep
Yeah,
doing it, and then only you can be a designer. Otherwise, you are a good designer in your head, and it
I
doesn't
know. I
solve
love that.
anybody's
Yes,
problem. Yeah, you have to do
yes,
it.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. What in your experience, personal experience and otherwise working with other designers, do you see as the core challenges that designers face, both in terms of how they perceive themselves and how they are, versus, and in terms of what they face from the external world?
Uh, it's an interesting question. My answer to this is that it's a two-edged sword.
Hmm.
People definitely consider, treat them as special, the
Hmm.
treatment, and there are a lot of stereotypes. And designers take that to advantage, which is not a good thing. That if they treat you exclusively doesn't mean that you need to go with that because you are
Yeah.
escaping from facing the reality. I think more obvious challenges would be, I think, communication. At least for and from my experiences, could be my personal flaw, I would say.
Hmm.
But that what tools to use to communicate. At least I felt that if back in NID, if I practice that more. But I understand education cannot solve for all the problems, and you have to then figure out
Exactly.
ways. So I think
Yes.
we had to invent tools to communicate better.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Also, that sometimes we designers take this thing in this attitude we need to change is that I don't understand business. Okay, this
Yes.
this
Yes.
this
Yes.
I've heard this many times,
Me
and
too.
no, no,
Yes.
no, I can't read Excel sheets, or I think we have to take an effort. I think I think if you don't have empathy for your own sector and on your own people in the businesses, and you're trying to just empathize with an external consumer, it makes no sense to me. So I think it's extremely key to try and understand business sheets. Take somebody's help to at least help you simplify what does this mean. I think me going to a business school really helped me to only do better design and more bolder design, to not so that I can use the same language and to be on the same page. So I think some of these things
Yes.
we have to change, and be
So
aware.
important.
Yeah,
Yes.
of these. Yeah.
No, I love that because I wanted to ask how the combination of going to design school and then doing an MBA, how that sort of reflected on your career and your skills. So I would love to hear more about that because I see this, what you mentioned, I've seen this in myself and I've learned to grow out of it because I was the person who said, oh, I don't know Excel sheets, and I grew out of it because I learned that it's very, very important. So yes, so I would love to know how that combination actually
Yeah,
helped you.
because see, naturally as designer or a creative person, I don't want to be challenged, right? I just want to be
Yes,
in that cocoon where, like in our schools, we have all the prototype materials. There's nobody to question. You can create any hypothetical problem. We create hypothetical problems also.
yes,
Forget solutions, right? But
yeah,
that's part of a training to extend your imagination. When you come to the real
yes,
real grounds, that doesn't stand true because there is no space for something like that. You can't. I think you have to be aware of economy, right? And then
yes,
if design cannot help increase or help economies of scale, what's the point? I mean, then it is just you're doing it for yourself. You're just
yes.
dancing in your own. So I think. I also blame myself initially for a few years. I
Hmm.
threw a lot of tantrums, and I'm sure Nisa had to kind of bear with it. And I think she was patient enough and aware that
Yeah.
maybe the other way to do this is to send her to business school so she understands the other side. But I think it worked, and I think. Earlier we had, and I think for a couple of years we did make products and prototypes and forms and shapes which were not necessarily very practical, right?
Hmm.
For many point of view,
Okay.
it looked gorgeous and beautiful,
Hmm.
but we got kind of carried away with design. So that striking that balance is really, really important, to be pragmatic and be realistic. It's tough for designers to straddle that, but once you learn to do that and once you're aware of that, I think, and more than that, once you accept that there are certain things you can definitely do and experiment, but there are certain things which has to follow certain guidelines and constraints. And I think one of the biggest design principles we are taught in the school is that constraints are beautiful, right? For
Yes.
design, more
Yes.
constraint. So consider this as a constraint, right? And then you kind of make peace with it. And I've only seen that ideas then become even more useful, more exciting. In fact, it's
Hmm.
not that they are less creative. They actually are more creative idea. They are
Yes.
more innovative because of you've taken care of more constraints. So that's what I
Absolutely.
would say, that add more constraints to you.
Yes. Absolutely love that. Guys, at this point, I would like to invite any questions that you might have
Sure.
from Darshan around design. So I will. I'm waiting for your questions. Just type those in. While we wait for that, Darshan, I also had this question around. Like, can you over design something? Can you think too much, try too hard, and end up with an over designed product or something like that
Always,
exist?
I think it starts with over designing, and there is nothing wrong about it.
Hmm.
Because until and unless you don't over design, you don't know the limits of
Hmm.
how amazing it can get or how expansive
Yeah.
it is get. So you have to expand for sure. You have to
Yes.
overthink, but keeping in mind that once you go there, you have to bring it down. Because if you
Yeah.
don't it's not, I wouldn't say overthink or over design. Of course, we see there are two ways to look at it. When you say over design, it could be in a positive way, but when you say over design can also be by materiality, right? So I'm
Yes.
not talking about materiality, I'm talking about more intellectual right now. When it comes to materiality, of course, I mean, I think I often say this in my talks or in my writings, or even at Godrej when I speak to somebody when say that, oh, you are a great design team, you design great things. And I actually said that we undesign a lot of things.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
strip down, that's also in a way over designing, right?
Yes.
It's up to you how
Yes.
you see it. But
Yes, exactly. Because the
but
process is
not
long. Yeah.
typical design doesn't mean that it has to have more curves and it has to have more hands and legs.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I think it's making sure that there is enough optimal material, but there is also that extra that can
Hmm.
actually amplify the emotion of somebody who's going
Hmm.
to use it. So I think again there, where do you stop is important.
Yes.
But over
Yes.
design to begin with, I would totally encourage. Yeah. Yeah.
Love that. Okay. So I have a question here from two questions actually. One from Ritvija. So she wants to know if she says, is doing a management degree more beneficial after a design degree, or is it more beneficial to specialize in a particular design discipline?
Which field this is, it depends on that.
Uh, Ritvija, can you just let us know what field? If is there a particular field that you're talking about? I guess the answer would depend on that. In the meanwhile, I have another question here. So, graphic design related question. How do you feel about DIY design apps like Canva, Nix, Logo Maker, Stock Images, etc.?
It's good for certain aspects. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say that it can help you discover the meaning, and that even graphic design is a discipline. Again, that still falls into stylization. It
Yes.
definitely makes you when your presentation look good and sharper, and it's a very good app. I would totally recommend people to use it because I've seen how we make our PPTs and how we make our
Yeah.
presentations. So why not beautify them? But is it gonna give you anything like graphic design when you're trying to discover a meaning through a logo or a type or illustration or mnemonic? Not necessarily. So two different
Yeah.
things. It's a more stylization based app, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I find them very, very useful, for, again, like you said, for certain purposes, but in certain
Yeah.
ways, they can also limit your thinking, right? Because when you have
Yeah.
templates already laid out
Yeah.
for you, when you have
Yeah.
things already laid
Yeah.
out for you, that puts
Yeah.
you in a box.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay. Another question around UX design and universal design and its future in the country. So, does UX design have a good future in the country?
I have seen a lot of product designers from my batch, seniors, juniors, a lot of other discipline actually taking a diversion towards UX design. Not that I know much about this field,
Hmm.
but it is definitely in demand, and the future definitely is there. But it's a very vast field, so there are a lot of applications and there's a lot of fields. So UX design in what sector then becomes important? What interests you? Because UX design is user experience, user interface design. So it uses a first part of design thinking, which is connecting dots, categorization, user prototyping, data mining, conceptualizing at that stage. And will very health would be huge, for example, going
Yeah.
forward. Applications in what field, then you have to think of universal design. Yes, not as a separate field, I would say.
Hmm.
And then this is again my belief that things like sustainability design or universal design should be part of any good design practice. It should be a
Yes.
filter,
Hmm.
right? It can't be a separate discipline. In whatever I do, if I can increase the proportion of it being more and more universal and inclusive, that's where the scale is going to come. Having a separate, secluded universal design, I don't see
Hmm.
huge scope, maybe more speciality, yes. But and also now as globe, where the world is becoming one, it's automatically sustainability, eco universalization is happening already as we speak. So any design project I do has to be universal in that sense.
Yes. Yes, that's a great answer. I'm getting lots of very nice questions from space. So thank you so much for asking all these wonderful questions. Uh, say advertising and commercial design agencies are very impatient with business, and the approach is desperate, not qualitative, or they don't take time to design or create a brand. Uh, yes, that is true, and I also feel that depends on both the brand as well as the agency. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that, Darshan?
Um, I think it's an excuse. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think it's again having that conversation, being open and honest. And I'll go back to my dating example and say that you have a conversation with client, right? Try and make it
Yeah.
as designful as possible. And in the from the question, it's obvious that you've identified that it seems like more commercial, but why don't you then push back and say that, you know, if you're really looking for something distinctive, then we have to apply. We need some more time.
Hmm.
Um, and then adapt to more or tools or style or methodology, which even in shorter time, I mean, a lot of projects we've done overnight, right? It's again
Yeah.
attitude based question. So you have to change some of these in your head uh, and
Yes.
approach it differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Drishti asks if you can speak a little bit more about design research and its future prospects.
Sorry, can you repeat again? Sorry.
So Drishti says, can you speak a little bit more about design research and its future prospects?
Design research, right?
Hmm.
Um, Design research is going to always remain very relevant to in now. I think it is going to be slightly more important because there is a lot more misinformation than information. So the research methodology or the research, the way you read the research on what people are saying and what you are seeing versus what they mean are vastly different because of the social media and because of the
Yes.
platform line. I have dual
Yes.
personality or more than dual personality. What is true and what is false is going to be
Yeah.
very tricky. And hence, the research, your eye for research and insight needs to be very, very differently trained. Thanks for asking that question. That also makes me think differently now.
Hmm. Yeah, me too, because what the point that you made about responding on social media, it's just yeah, it
Yeah.
just makes so much it is very different. It's not how, you don't actually get to interact with the person. You're just seeing their answer, and that changes a
Yeah.
lot of things.
And with
Yes.
more and more technology now, there is a need, there is an innate unconscious behavior that we all are into.
Hmm.
We don't know what, we are trapped in some kind of tech
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and we don't know how we are behaving. So I think
Yeah.
even me, you know, I'm also a party to that. So I think it needs to be that human behavior, behavioral researches are going to be, and you see a lot of these giants and a lot of these companies are actually now investing and having designers on board as you know,
Hmm.
chief behavioral research or chief
Hmm.
experience designers and stuff
Hmm.
like that's happening.
Yes. Yes. Um, Okay, so another question here. Okay, so I have two questions on interior designing. So I'll take that up and ask you if you want to
Sure.
address that around
Sure.
interior designing and what is its scope? How do you see that? And also maybe how do you see it evolving because it is changing as well?
So I haven't done interior designing in a long time, but
Yeah.
I've studied interior designing, so I think I have a right to speak about it, and I will take that whatever I say with the pinch of salt. Um, uh, Great scope for interior designers to redefine almost every object, almost everything differently, just based on a simple fact. look at how we are using kitchen, living room beds anymore. I mean, I don't remember using sofa for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, all my activities around either, around bed or wherever the plug points are, right? So,
Yes.
laptops, iPads, always around me. So I think the whole uh, human footprint in a house has changed. The new innovations about appliances, storage systems, etc., and the way I am consuming objects, the way things I am buying, and I see interior designing as going on from past to now. I see a great scope for it
Shift,
to
yeah.
now take a very different take on how you plan functional parts of your houses or offices, and how do you create recreational spaces, and how do you think about open versus private spaces. Very different times, very different consumers, very different behaviors. So I think, and it's I think whoever is into this field now, using material sensibly, using concepts which are more in high tech, security, etc., totally redefined, right? So I see, if you are a good, smart interior designer, I really see a scope to completely change the traditional. I think it goes back to education to me. How,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is another field I'm very fascinated. And I'm actually doing my house right now, and I'm trying to experiment something and to see with minimum, and how am I going to maximize both storages and recreational for myself, because my home has to be a party for myself now.
Yeah, and I think that this question actually made me think about how our concept of home has also changed because of the situation we are in. We've never spent so much time at home. We are working from home now, so that also changes so many things. And if this looks
Yeah,
like it's also going to create a shift in the way
yeah,
that we work at home,
yeah,
then
yeah.
immense scope for that as well,
Absolutely. I
and
mean,
education that.
I think also for furniture design, how will you
Yeah.
imagine how,
Yes.
what all will you rethink about, comfort,
Yeah.
everything, right? So,
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah. That brings me to another question, Darshan, like two last questions, and then we'll end this. One is that how has the lockdown and this new situation impacted the way that you are thinking about, design in your space and in Godrej? So one is that, and that relates to another question I have around managing research in these times. And yeah, so that question first, and then I just have one more question, and then we can end.
I, for some funny reason, I see this as it's gonna bring a lot of positive change to
Hmm.
the field of design. I mean, taking example from what we have done, I think the speed of execution, prototyping, that thinking progressive about solutions now, how we are thinking about system design. It's a
Yeah.
great time to rethink system design, great
Yeah.
time to rethink a lot technology integration into products, to connectivity. It has just only fast tracked the
Yes.
progress for the field of design, and this is actually the best time to start recruiting designers, because I think it's a time where you can now start stretching your imagination, because in design we always wanted to be more eco-friendly, we always wanted it to be more efficient, more convenient, we've always wanted to be more human. Now, I mean, what time can be better than this, where you can actually apply any of these human based disciplines? So I think it's a great time
Yes.
to
Yes.
experiment. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, okay, so my last question is are there certain practices that you have that you do in order to stay updated, to stay current, or is it just part of your work and it happens naturally? Like, do you make extra effort to keep updating or upskilling yourself?
Definitely all the digital platforms online.
Yeah.
The other thing recently I found what was very useful to actually go back to history and some of the classical old books. And I did take some
Hmm.
of the online courses like on Coursera, things like,
Hmm.
sometimes it's interesting that I don't read that many design books, and I don't get more ideas from design books, but I get ideas from children's book sometimes. Sometimes I get
Yes.
ideas from learning about fashion. Sometimes I get ideas from learning about computer science, or just
Yeah.
something as simple as, I was doing this course and it was all about history of art and Indian aesthetics. And then at one point there is this, when you're reading, oh, this, I can apply this into my design practice. So I think just for designer, I think the most important thing is to keep yourself updated with more and more subjects. Uh, and I think having that curiosity of, I would follow more of health blogs now, or
Hmm.
more cultural art, a lot of art,
Yeah.
what they talk about. And because they always represent, the art always represent the present times.
Yes.
It's a great way to sense the emotions. It's a great way to see where the world is going. What are the issues people are talking about in whatever manner, philosophically,
Yeah.
intellectually. But I think it's a great way to tap on, to see what's happening in the other fields than your own field.
Yes. Um, Absolutely wonderful. Darshan, I loved this session. I think I learned so much and it refreshed my whole, like, uh, my own understanding also, which I think I needed. So this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Everyone, this will also be on our IGTV. So if you want to, just rewatch this again, what I'll also try to do is take some of the things Darshan mentioned in terms of resources and try put it up as a story so that you have those resources. Yes, so have a good weekend, everyone. Have a good weekend, Darshan. And yes,
Thank
all
you so
right.
much. Thank you, everyone, for hearing me out, and all the best, and take
Yeah,
care. Bye.
yes, all
Bye.
right. Bye.